Hi everyone, I'm Lisa and I'm here with Abigail and Giovanni and we are Bedtime Stories for Kids. We're reading chapter 2 of book 1, The Maze of Bones from the 39 Clues series by Riordan. I hope you enjoy it. Chapter 2. Dan Cahill thought he had the most annoying big sister on the planet. And that was before she set fire to $2 million. It all started when they went to their grandmother's funeral. Secretly, Dan was excited because he was hoping to make a rubbing of the tombstone after everyone else was gone. He figured Grace wouldn't care. She'd been a cool grandmother. Dan loved collecting things. He collected baseball cards, autographs of famous outlaws, Civil War weapons, rare coins, and every cast he'd ever had since kindergarten. All 12 of them. At the moment, what he liked collecting best were charcoal rubbings of tombstones. He had some awesome ones back at the apartment. His favorite read, Cruella Good, 1891 to 1929. I'm dead, let's have a party. He figured if he had a rubbing of Grace's tombstone in his collection, maybe it wouldn't feel quite so much like she was gone forever. Anyway, the whole way from Boston to the funeral in Worcester County, his great-aunt Beatrice was driving like a very slow lunatic. She went 25 miles an hour on the highway and kept drifting across lanes, so the other cars honked and swerved and ran into guardrails and stuff. Aunt Beatrice just kept clutching the wheel with her jeweled fingers. Her wrinkly face was made up with day-glow red lipstick and rouge, which made her blue hair look even bluer. Dan wondered if she gave the other drivers nightmares about old clowns. "Amy!" she snapped, as another SUV careened down the exit ramp because Beatrice had just pulled in front of it. "Stop reading in the car! It's not safe!" "But Aunt Beatrice..." "Young lady, close that book!" Amy did, which was typical. She never put up a fight with adults. Amy had long, reddish-brown hair, unlike Dan's, which was dark blonde. This helped Dan pretend his sister was an alien imposter, but unfortunately they had the same eyes. Green like jade, their grandmother used to say. Amy was 3 years older and 6 inches taller than Dan, and she never let him forget it. Like being 14 was such a big deal. Usually, she wore jeans and an old t-shirt because she didn't like people noticing her. But today, she was wearing a black dress, so she looked like a vampire's bride. Dan hoped her outfit was as uncomfortable as his stupid suit and tie. Aunt Beatrice had thrown a fit when he tried to go to the funeral in his ninja clothes. It wasn't as if Grace would care if he was comfortable and deadly, the way he felt when he pretended to be a ninja. But, of course, Aunt Beatrice didn't understand. Sometimes it was hard for him to believe she and Grace were sisters. "Remind me to fire your au pair as soon as we return to Boston," Beatrice grumbled. "You two have been entirely too spoiled." "Nellie's nice," Dan protested. "Humph, this Nellie almost let you burn down the neighbor's apartment building." "Exactly!" Every couple of weeks, Beatrice fired their au pair and hired a new one. The only good thing was that Aunt Beatrice didn't live with them personally. She lived across town in a building that didn't allow kids, so sometimes it took her a few days to hear about Dan's latest exploits. Nellie had lasted longer than most. Dan liked her because she made amazing waffles, and she usually cranked her iPod up to brain damage level. She didn't even hear when Dan's bottle rocket collection went off and strafed the building across the alley. Dan would miss Nellie when she got fired. Aunt Beatrice kept driving and muttering about spoiled children. Amy secretly went back to her huge book. The last 2 days, since they got the news about Grace's death, Amy had been reading even more than usual. Dan knew it was her way of hiding, but he kind of resented it because it shut him out too. "What are you reading this time?" he asked. "Medieval European doorknobs? Bath towels through the ages?" Amy gave him an ugly face, or an uglier than usual face. "None of your business, dweeb." "You can't call a ninja lord dweeb. You have disgraced the family. You must commit seppuku." "Seppuku." Amy rolled her eyes. After a few miles, the city melted into farmland. It started to look like Grace country, and even though Dan had promised himself he wouldn't get sappy, he began to feel sad. Grace had been the coolest ever. She treated him and Amy like real people, not kids. That's why she insisted they simply call her Grace, not grandmother or gran or nana or any silly name like that. She'd been one of the only people who'd ever cared about them. Now she was dead, and they had to go to the funeral and see a bunch of relatives who had never been nice to them. The family cemetery sat at the bottom of the hill from the mansion. Dan thought it was kind of stupid that they hired a hearse to carry Grace 100 yards down the driveway. But they could have put wheels on the coffin like they have on suitcases, and that would have worked just as well. Summer storm clouds rumbled overhead. The family mansion looked dark and gloomy on its hill, like a lord's castle. Dan loved the place, with its billion of rooms and chimneys and stained glass windows. He loved the family graveyard even more. A dozen crumbling tombstones spread out across a green meadow ringed in trees, right next to a little creek. Some of the stones were so old, the writing had faded away. Grace used to take Amy and him down to the meadow on their weekend visits. Grace and Amy would spend the afternoon on a picnic blanket, reading and talking, while Dan explored the graves and the woods and the creek. "Stop that," Dan told himself. "You're getting sentimental." "So many people," Amy murmured as they walked down the driveway. "You're not going to freak out, are you?" Amy fiddled with the collar of her dress. I'm not freaking out. You hate crowds," he finished. "But you knew there'd be a crowd. They come every year." Each winter, as long as Dan could remember, Grace had invited relatives from all over the world for a week-long holiday. The mansion filled up with Chinese Cahills and British Cahills and South African Cahills and Venezuelan Cahills. Most of them didn't even go by the name Cahill, but Grace assured them that they were all related. She'd explain about cousins and second cousins and cousins 3 times removed until Dan's brain started to hurt. Amy would usually go hide in the library with the cat. "I know," she said, "but look at them all." She had a point. About 400 people were gathering at the gravesite. "They just want her fortune," Dan decided. "Dan? Well, it's true." They had just joined the procession when Dan suddenly got flipped upside down. "Hey!" he yelled. "Look, guys," a girl said. "We caught a rat." Dan wasn't in a good position to see, but he could make out the Holt sisters, Madison and Regan, standing on either side of him, holding him by his ankles. The twins had matching purple running suits, blonde pigtails, and crooked smiles. They were only 11, same as Dan, but they had no trouble holding him. Dan saw more purple running suits behind them, the rest of the Holt family. Their pit bull, Arnold, raced around their legs and barked. "Let's fling him into the creek," Madison said. "I want to fling him into the bushes," Regan said. "We never do my ideas." Their older brother Hamilton laughed like an idiot. Next to him, their dad, Eisenhower Holt, and their mom, Mary Todd, grinned like this was all good fun. "Now, girls," Eisenhower said, "we can't go flinging people at a funeral. This is a happy occasion." "Amy," Dan called, "a little help here?" Her face had gone pale. She mumbled, "Drop." Dan sighed in exasperation. "She's trying to say drop me." Madison and Regan did. On his head. "Ow," Dan said. Madison," Amy protested. Yes," Madison mimicked. "I think all those books are turning your brain to mush, weirdo." If it had been anyone else, Dan would have hit back, but he knew better than with the Holts. Even Madison and Regan, the youngest, could cream him. The whole Holt family was way too buff. They had meaty hands and thick necks and faces that looked like G.I. Joe figures. Even the mom looked like she should be shaving and chewing on a cigar. "I hope you losers get a good last look around the house," Madison said. "You're not going to be invited back here anymore now that the old witch is dead." "Rough," said Arnold, the pit bull. Dan looked around for Beatrice, but as usual, she wasn't anywhere near them. She drifted off to talk to the other old people. Grace wasn't a witch, Dan said, and we're going to inherit this place. The big brother Hamilton laughed. Yeah, right. His hair was combed toward the middle, so it stuck up like a sharp shark fin. Wait till they read the will, runt. I'm going to kick you out myself. All right, team, the dad said. Enough of this. Formation. The family lined up and started jogging toward the gravesite, knocking other relatives out of their way as Arnold snapped at everyone's heels. Is your head okay? Amy asked guiltily. Dan nodded. He was a little annoyed that Amy hadn't helped him, but there was no point in complaining about it. She always got tongue-tied around other people. Man, I hate the Holts. We've got worse problems. Amy pointed toward the gravesite, and Dan's heart sank. The Cobras, he muttered. Ian and Natalie Cabra were standing by Grace's coffin, looking like perfect little angels as they talked to the preacher. They wore matching designer mourning outfits that complemented their silky black hair and cinnamon-colored skin. They could have been child supermodels. They won't try anything during the funeral, Dan said hopefully. They're just here for Grace's money like the rest of them, but they won't get it. Amy frowned. Dan, did you really believe what you said about us inheriting the mansion? Of course! You know Grace liked us best. We spent more time with her than anybody. Amy sighed like Dan was too young to understand, which Dan hated. Come on, she said. We might as well get this over with. And together they waded into the crowd. The funeral was a blur to Dan. The minister said some stuff about ashes. They lowered the coffin into the ground. Everybody tossed in a shovel of dirt. Dan thought the mourners enjoyed this part too much, especially Ian and Natalie. He recognized a few more relatives. Alistair, the old Korean dude with the diamond-tipped walking stick who always insisted they call him Uncle. The Russian lady, Irina Spassky, who had a twitch in one eye, so everybody called her Spaz behind her back. The Starling triplets, Ned, Ted, and Sinead, who looked like part of a cloned Ivy League lacrosse team. Even that kid from television was there, Jonah Wizard. He stood to one side getting his picture taken with a bunch of girls, and there was a line of people waiting to talk to him. He was dressed just like on TV, with lots of silver chains and bracelets, ripped jeans, and a black muscle shirt, which was kind of stupid since he didn't have any muscles. An older African-American guy in a business suit stood behind him, punching notes in a BlackBerry. Probably Jonah's dad. Dan had heard that Jonah Wizard was related to the Cahills, but he'd never seen him in person before. He wondered if he should get an autograph for his collection. After the service, a guy in a charcoal gray suit stepped to the podium. He looked vaguely familiar to Dan. The man had a long pointed nose and a balding head. He reminded Dan of a vulture. Thank you all for coming, he said gravely. I am William McIntyre, Madam Cahill's lawyer and executor. Executor? Dan whispered to Amy. He killed her? No, you idiot, Amy whispered back. That means he's in charge of her will. If you will look inside your programs, William McIntyre continued, some of you will find a gold invitation card. Excited murmuring broke out as 400 people leafed through their programs. Then most of them cursed and shouted complaints when they found nothing. Dan ripped through his program. Inside was a card with a gold-leafed border. It read, Dan and Amy Cahill are hereby invited to the reading of the last will and testament of Grace Cahill, where the Great Hall, Cahill Manor, when, now. This is what it looks like in the book. I knew it, Dan said. I assure you, Mr. McIntyre said, raising his voice above the crowd. The invitations were not done randomly. I apologize to those of you who were excluded. Grace Cahill meant you no disrespect. Of all the members of the Cahill clan, only a few were chosen as the most likely. The crowd started yelling and arguing. Finally, Dan couldn't stand it anymore. He called out, Most likely to what? In your case, Dan, Ian Cabra muttered right behind him, to be a stupid American git. His sister Natalie giggled. She was holding an invitation and looked very pleased with herself. Before Dan could kick Ian in a soft spot, the gray-suited man answered, To be the beneficiaries of Grace Cahill's will. Now, if you please, those with invitations will gather in the great hall. People with invitations hurried toward the house like somebody had just yelled, "Free food!" Natalie Cabra winked at Dan. "Ciao, cousin. Must run collect our fortune." Then she and her brother strolled up the drive. "Forget them," Amy said. "Dan, maybe you're right. Maybe we'll inherit something." But Dan frowned. If this invitation was such a great thing, why did the lawyer guy look so grim? And why had Grace included the Cabras? As he passed through the main entrance of the mansion, Dan glanced up at the stone crest above the door. A large C surrounded by 4 smaller designs, a dragon, a bear, a wolf, and 2 snakes entwined around a sword. The crest had always fascinated Dan, though he didn't know what it meant. All the animals seemed to glare at him like they were about to strike. He followed the crowd inside, wondering why those animals were so mad. The great hall was as big as a basketball court, with tons of armor and swords lining the walls and huge windows that looked like Batman could crash through them at any minute. William McIntyre stood at a table in front with a projector screen behind him, while everybody else filed into rows of seats. There were about 40 people in all, including the Holts and the Cabras and Aunt Beatrice, who looked completely disgusted to be there. Or maybe she was just disgusted that everybody else had been invited to hear her sister's will reading. Mr. McIntyre raised his hand for quiet. He slipped a document from a brown leather folder, adjusted his bifocals, and began to read. "I, Grace Cahill, being of sound mind and body, do hereby divide my entire estate among those who accept the challenge and those who do not." "Whoa!" Eisenhower Holt interrupted. "What challenge? What's she mean?" "I'm getting to that, sir." Mr. McIntyre cleared his throat and continued, "You have been chosen as most likely to succeed in the greatest, most perilous undertaking of all time, a quest of vital importance to the Cahill family and the world at large." We're going to stop this video here. This is in the middle of Chapter 2, and we will continue with Chapter 2, Part 2, in the next video.